Good morning, Good morning, everyone, whether you're in Brazil or in India or elsewhere in the world joining us today to hear Dr. Shruti Das speak on a very important Indian writer and thinker and social activist, Arundhati Roy. And also, I'm very happy to welcome you to this first event organized by our, in this online format of 2021, organized and sponsored by our research group at the Federal University of Brazil, Mulheres e Produção Cultural, Women and Cultural Production, as well as by the Sociology Department of the Federal University of Paraná. And I'll give you a brief introduction to Shruti herself, who is a great scholar and a dear friend of mine. Then my colleague, Ana Beatriz, is going to give a Portuguese language version of that introduction. And we will continue on to Dr. Shruti Das' talk and just some additional information to all of you. As is always the case, we have the chat here available for your comments and questions, which can be posted in English or in Portuguese. After Dr. Das is done with her talk, we will have half an hour for conversation, comments, question, answer session. Okay, so thank you very much. And just 1 second here. This is, a new technological challenge for all of us. So, Dr. Shruti Das is Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English at Berhampur University in Odisha, India. She is a translator, creative writer, and critic. She writes bilingually in English and her native tongue, Odia. She has participated and presented papers as plenary and keynote speaker and chaired sessions in many national and international seminars and webinars on English language, literature, and eco-criticism, including speaking in many parts of India, in the United States, and in Europe. She has been a visiting lecturer in 2 universities in Poland, and has the distinction of being placed in the ALA Directory of Scholars at Princeton University in the United States. She has published widely research articles and creative work in national and international journals and books, and has published 11 books, including 2 volumes of poetry. Shruti is widely traveled and is a member of the board of editors and the advisory board of many national and international literary journals, and is currently the editor of Literary Oracle, an international journal of literature and culture. Her poetry has been published in many anthologies and journals in India and abroad. As translator and public speaker of repute, she has received international acclaim and has been placed in the Bibliography of Commonwealth Writers for her volume of poems. Her special interests are post-colonialism, South Asian feminism, Indian aesthetics, eco-criticism, and English language teaching. So once again, it is my pleasure to welcome Shruti and to all of you who are here watching today, and to emphasize that we researchers at the Federal University of Paraná, who belong to the research group Women and Cultural Production, are thrilled to have Shruti here, also to intensify, renew, establish ties with Indian women, scholars, writers, as we believe in the importance of these South-to-South connections. And so for us, this is a very important moment. And let's hope then that it is just the start of brilliant new partnerships and exchange of ideas, of scholarly work. And perhaps when these pandemic times are over, we will be able to enjoy physical events and exchanges as well. So now I will pass the floor to my dear friend and colleague, Ana Beatriz Paula, who is also a specialist in Indian literature and has done quite an amazing and pioneering job at our own university, disseminating the work of Indian writers and of Indian writers, women writers in particular, and among them Arundhati Roy, that is the subject of today's conversation. So,
thank you, Miriam. And thank you, Shruti Das, for coming here and being with us in this moment. Eu vou fazer a introdução em português sobre o nosso evento. Então, é um evento organizado pelo Grupo de Pesquisa Mulheres e Produção Cultural, que é vinculado ao Núcleo de Estudos de Gênero da Universidade Federal do Paraná, e também é organizado, claro, pela pós-graduação de Sociologia, aqui representada muito brilhantemente pela professora Miriam Adman. É uma alegria esse evento, um primeiro evento nesse formato, e nós contamos com a presença da doutora Shruti Das, que além de ser uma pessoa muito próxima a nós, ela também é uma grande pesquisadora e, como vocês vão ver pelo currículo dela, é uma pessoa que tem uma circulação em diferentes espaços e pode nos trazer uma colaboração bastante rica em relação aos estudos, sejam de gênero e aos estudos da literatura indiana contemporânea. Doutora Shruti Das é professora associada e chefe do Departamento de Inglês da Berhampur University em Odisha, na Índia. É tradutora, escritora criativa e crítica literária. Já publicou diversos artigos acadêmicos e textos literários em revistas nacionais e internacionais, em inglês e em sua língua nativa, Odia, além de 11 livros, dentre os quais 2 de poesia. O seu primeiro livro de poesia garantiu o prêmio ASLE Travel Award de 2019 na Universidade da Califórnia, além de ser incluída no Bibliography of Commonwealth Writers. A professora é ainda membro do Conselho de Editores e do Conselho Consultivo de muitas revistas literárias nacionais e internacionais e da editora de Literary Oracle, an International Journal of Literature and Culture. Sua pesquisa abrange os temas de pós-colonialismo, feminismo do Sul da Ásia, estética indiana, eco-crítica e ensino de língua inglesa. E que esse evento seja um evento para fortalecer vínculos em relação a pesquisas e também a produção literária de mulheres do Sul, né, do planeta. Então, eu passo a palavra à professora doutora Shruti Das. Welcome and thank you again for being here with us. It's a very, very important and nice experience for us all. It's your turn.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Am I audible to all? I hope I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's okay.
Can you hear me, Virginia? Okay,
yes,
thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Miriam Edelman, my dearest friend, and my friend, Ana Beatriz Paula. Thank you, Virginia. And I'm so happy to be virtually there in Brazil. I always wanted to go, and I would have been there had we not had this pandemic. Well, I missed a chance, of course. I was supposed to go to Manus in, I think, 2018, but I missed the chance. And anyway, I'm so happy to be here today virtually with you all. So with this, I think I wouldn't keep the audience waiting. I should go into the paper. And today I'm going to talk about an important writer, feminist, socialist activist, and her views about social discrimination and caste consciousness, right? So the title of the paper is Social Discrimination and Caste Consciousness in the Fiction of Arundhati Roy. Before I progress into the paper, I would like all of you to know what is caste. Caste is not so much as race that we see in the West, we see in America. It is not an apartheid because of the color of the skin, but it is some kind of discrimination, a terrible discrimination because of a stratified society. India, from ancient times, has remained a fragmented society owing to the practice of caste system, a system that began with stratifying society along the lines of occupation and social guilds. There were primarily 4 such guilds. The Brahmins, who were the priests, the teachers, and the assessors of knowledge. Then the Kshatriyas, or the warrior class, and the ruling class. They ruled, they were the kings, the fighters, the ministers. So they were the Kshatriyas. And then there were the third class was the traders, or the Vaishyas. And finally, there was a class or guild that served all these 3 classes, and they were designated as the Shudras. And the Ati Shudras, Ati is ultimate Shudras, who were the untouchables. Gradually, the stratification, at least in America, people do not feel bad to touch somebody who is African American or has a black skin. But here, touching a person of a lower caste is prohibited. So gradually, the stratification that was done for smooth functioning of society became something that was entrenched as a social normative in society. While priests, rulers, warriors, landowners, and farmers have traditionally formed the upper class of society, there also have been a section of people assigned to serve these upper caste people known as Shudras. The Shudras have over centuries had their place in the fringes of society, serving the upper caste people and suffering ostracization and untouchability. Dalit is a modern term for untouchables in India. It is a class nomenclature now assigned to a group of oppressed, downtrodden people in India. These people have been treated as social outcasts, and their voice has been silenced for centuries. James Massey explains the term Dalit as the burst, the split, the broken or torn asunder, the trodden down, the scattered, the crushed, and the destroyed. What more? Therefore, it describes a people who have been afflicted, marginalized, and tortured. Literally, they were slaves of the upper caste people. Most Dalits continue to live in extreme poverty without land or opportunities for better employment or education. With the exception of a minority who have benefited from India's policy of quotas in education and government jobs, Dalits are relegated to the most menial of tasks as manual scavengers, removers of human waste and dead animals, leather workers, street sweepers and cobblers. Illiteracy, unemployment, poverty, and social backwardness of Dalits are the root causes for their plight. Almost 1/6 of India's population, almost 160 million people or more, constitute what B.R. Ambedkar called the depressed classes. They live a precarious existence, shunned by much of society because of their rank as untouchables or Dalits, literary meaning broken people at the bottom of India's caste system. Despite the fact that untouchability was abolished under India's constitution in 1949, the practice of untouchability, the imposition of social disabilities on persons by reason of their birth in certain castes remains very much an integral part of Indian social fabric. Dalit writing in its formative years has been largely about articulating protest. So gradually, the Dalit became educated, even if not the entire Dalit community, Dalit people throughout India, yet quite a few of them became educated and started writing about themselves, their own stories. So Dalit writing in its formative years had been largely about articulating protest, naturally, about self-respect, angst, identity, dignity, critiquing religion, politics, patriarchy, Dalit patriarchy, and the demand for space for Dalits in social, cultural, and political spheres. Over the years, activist thinkers like B.R. Ambedkar, who lived between 1891 to 1956, and Jyotiba Phule, who lived between 1826 and 1890, they've tried to evolve an ideology supporting the Dalit cause. Eva Maria Hartman, who has documented and analyzed Dalit movement in India, says that beginning in the 1990s, the network of the Dalit movement has spread across the globe, finding diasporic as well as non-Indian sympathizers who focus on racism, discrimination, human rights, and related issues. She takes a theoretical stand and emphasizes, I quote, emphasizes that the social fields where the movement activists produce meaning from local to the global context are structured by different power relations, unquote. In the same vein, the Dalit writer from India, Sharan Kumar Limbale, is of the opinion that, I quote, Dalit literature simultaneously makes the Dalits as well as the upper castes conscious of the gulf that exists even in a democratic nation like ours, unquote. The anger of exclusion runs through the discourse of much of Dalit literature, making them highly subjective. Arundhati Roy, the activist writer from India, does not belong to the class of untouchables. Yet, as an empathizer, has analyzed and attempted to objectively fictionalize some of the horrors of the Dalit existence in modern India. Discrimination against the Dalit in India is as real, as denied, as the discrimination against the Blacks in America. Both are denuded of meaningful agency. Roy's non-fiction and her two novels, The God of Small Things and The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, are veritable documents of social oppression. Both of Roy's novels are located in India and are representatives of the caste struggles that characterize rural and semi-urban India. In one of her more recent books, The Doctor and the Saint, published in 2019, Roy critiques caste discrimination. She discusses the role of the politicians and lack of political will to end the horrible social discrimination. She blames Gandhi, and other nationalist leaders for furthering the evils of untouchability in society. She cites M.S. Golwalkar, a right-wing politician who believed in the supremacy of race, and in 1939 wrote in his book, We or Our Nationhood Defined. That is the name of the book. We or Our Nationhood Defined. That, I quote, race pride at its highest has been manifested here. Just like in Hitler's Germany. He was influenced by Mussolini and Hitler, and he is citing Hitler's Germany and says, race pride at its highest has been manifested here. A good lesson for us in Hindustan. The other name for India is Hindustan. So he says, a good lesson for us in Hindustan to learn and profit by, unquote. In the same light, she also cites Annie Besant's essay published in the Indian Review in 1909, where she makes a case for segregating untouchable children from the children of purer caste in school. It may be noted that Annie Besant was a European who was a member of the Theosophical Society in British India, and also was the founding member of the Indian Congress. In fact, India's independence movement probably began with that Congress. So Annie Besant reiterates the Hindu Brahmanical bias and ideology and writes, I quote, their bodies, the untouchable children's bodies, look how they discriminate children, their bodies at present are ill-odorous and foul with the liquor and strong smelling food out of which for generations they have been built up. It will need some generations of purer food and living to make their bodies fit to sit in the close neighborhood of a schoolroom with children, with other children, with children of upper caste who are supposed to be purer or pure. And these children are supposed to be ill-odorous and foul because the generations before their birth used to take liquor and strong-smelling food with onion and garlic in them. And they were meat eaters also. So neither of Arundhati Roy's novels, neither God of Small Thing nor The Ministry of Utmost Happiness are Dalit narratives per se. Yet, to a major extent, Roy concerns herself with the life of the untouchables in India. The problems and the predicaments of the Dalit are spoken for by Roy. Deeply concerned with issues regarding the Aborigine, common masses, and environment, Roy relates to the injustice dominant society metes out to what and who it considers to be the other. So this dominant Indian society constantly others a lot of people, like it others the Aborigines, the indigenous people, the Dalit or the lower caste people and women. So Roy is concerned with those issues. Roy finds that it is not only the Hindus who practice social discrimination, but the Christians too practice this horrible discrimination. So it is very interesting, these poor Dalit, because the Hindus were oppressing them so much, they converted to Christianity because Christianity promised them equality and fraternity. Unfortunately for them, the Christians in India practice the caste system, which is contradictory to the basic tenets of Christianity. So within the limited scope of this lecture, I'm going to concern myself with Roy's first novel, The God of Small Things, published in 1993. In this novel, the dominant society projects, in 1997, In this novel, the dominant society projected is the Syrian Christian community. They are a Christian community living in Kerala. They were converted to Christianity by Saint Thomas. And the other is represented by the Paravans. The Paravans are an untouchable community who live in, in Kerala, right? There are many untouchable communities throughout India, right? And they also have subcastes, but this novel concerns itself with the Paravans who live in Kerala, right? So they are an untouchable community living there. The central underlying conflict in Arundhati Roy's text, The God of Small Things, is the power politics. The power politics between an untouchable person who, aware of his own marginality, attempts an emancipation, and the dominant society that spurns him. Veliya Papin, that is the name of one untouchable person, an elderly untouchable person. Veliya Papin, the untouchable Paravan, had two sons. An able-bodied Veluta, his younger son is Veluta, is able-bodied, and a paralyzed son, Kuttappin, who stays at home. He resigns to his fate of being a social outcast by virtue of his birth. And thus is the prototype of universal outcast who justify injustice. But his able son, Veluta, his younger able son, Veluta, is a modern youth with access to education, information, and politics, and his faith in socialism and democracy of modern India. He has aspirations and he has faith in the political system, which finally we will see how it betrays him. An independent-minded person, Veluta is loved and trusted by the marginalized people, but dreaded and hated by the dominant class. Ultimately, Veluta becomes a victim of the exploitation and treachery of society and the political party he is affiliated to. In The God of Small Things, Roy introduces hardships, those without which the narrative would not move, but the characters do not prevail in the end, enacting and embodying some sort of transition. We would expect some sort of fairy tale ending and some sort of, okay, everything is okay now. But it is Roy who tells us that everything is not okay, nothing has ended. So there is no transition, in spite of the fact that India has made her transition from a colonial status to a post-colonial democratic independent status. The status of the people has not changed. The meta-narrative of post-coloniality or independent India, namely education, progress, etc., is debunked, as Roy exposes, with acute cynicism, the hypocrisy inherent in the casteist and sexist society of Aymennin, the locale of the novel, which is a microcosm for independent India, in both social and emotional terms. In both the novels, human dignity is problematized, and subaltern consciousness struggling to surface from the margins to be heard in the throes of socioeconomic and political oppression is subtly foregrounded. In a novel, Roy portrays how the worst endowed Indians, I quote, have been oppressed not just economically or even physically, but also ideologically, presumed to be impure by the twice-born caste, who are the upper caste Brahmins, who believe that they pay in their present reincarnation for the bad karma of their previous lives. The Dalit have traditionally been relegated to the extreme margins of society, not only socially, but also geographically in much of rural India, where they live in separate hamlets away from the main villages whose temples they cannot enter, unquote. In the God of Small Things, I quote, Veluta, Veliapapin, and Kutapin lived in a little laterite hut downriver from the Agamemnon house. Agamemnon house is the house of the protagonist, or the Syrian Christian, the rich, upper class, upper caste Syrian Christian. It is a big house, and Veluta is a worker, a paravan, and an untouchable who goes to that house often to work there. Now, one reads further that, so Roy in her narrative tells us that the path which ran parallel to the river led to a little grassy clearing that was hemmed in by huddled trees, coconut, cashew, mango, bilimbi. On the edge of the clearing, with its back to the river, a low hut with walls of orange laterite plastered with mud and a thatched roof nestled close to the ground. The low walls of the hut were the same color as the earth they stood on, unquote. In fact, the walls made of mud were caving in on the paralyzed son of Veliapapin, who could not go out of the, of the hut, and he was taken care of, and he was always sleeping inside the hut unless his father pulled him out to get some sun. The inside of that little hut served as a combination of kitchen, living room, and bedroom for the family. This stands in sharp contrast to the Agamemnon house with its wonderful view, huge garden, sprawling verandas, many rooms, and elegant settings. Race, class, and gender discrimination are integral components of the Orthodox society of Agamemnon, which is reminiscent of the condition prevalent in medieval Europe. So this condition of the paravans reminds us of how the Europeans treated the barbarians. A parallel can be drawn between the untouchables and the barbarians described in the history of medieval Europe. In his article, The Image of the Barbarian in Medieval Europe, W.R. Jones says that, I quote, on various occasions, civilized man has found himself marching side by side with men at lower or different levels of social and cultural development. The great civilizations were accustomed to compare themselves quite favorably with these barbarian neighbors, whom they viewed with varying degrees of condescension, suspicion, scorn, and dread, unquote. He goes on to discuss how civilized people created a stereotypical image of the barbarian that expressed the dislike or distrust and was couched in terms favorable to civilization. The barbarian, whose way of life was viewed as less excellent than that of classical Greece, was frequently libeled by Hellenic writers, and most Roman commentators following this lead viewed Germanic and other kinds of barbarians as far too wild and woolly for their liking. Such rhetoric and the prejudices are explored in the narrative of the God of Small Things. The paravans are untouchables. They are toddy tapers. Toddy is a kind of wine, palm wine, which they tap. They are toddy tappers who were not allowed into the houses of the upper caste people. They are looked at with scorn, suspicion, condescension, and distrust. The narrator, Roy, describes the social status of the paravans with bare cynicism. She says, Papachi is the patriarch of the Aipe family who live in this big house. Papachi would not allow the paravans into the house. Nobody would. They were not allowed to touch anything that touchables touched. Caste Hindus, caste Christians. Mamachi, the matriarch, told Esther and Rahel the two protagonists of that novel, the children, that she could remember a time in her girlhood when paravans were expected to crawl backwards with a broom, sweeping away their footprints so that Brahmins or Syrian Christians would not defile themselves by accidentally stepping into a paravan's footprint, unquote. Roy's reiteration of the phrase caste Christian reveals a specific Indian social paradox. Oppressed socially and economically, the untouchables or the Dalit of India have attempted to change their religion into casteless religions like Christianity or Buddhism. Much to the disdain and frustration, the untouchables have found out that conversion does not ensure assimilation. Even casteless religions in India are not immune to the religious, dharmic, karmic discourse of the Hindu upper caste. The upper class consolidated its socio-economic position and safeguarded its class interests by imposing dogmas as the basis of class system. In the course of time, caste came to be viewed traditionally as a divinely ordained institution where Dalits were assigned the lowest position, and people, including Dalits themselves, stopped questioning their relevance or legitimacy. Even the Dalit never questioned this. Both the upper caste and the lower caste seem to believe in the age-old hierarchical social order as sanctified by religion and rendered acceptable by tradition. Roy says that, I quote, "Equally, it could be argued that it began thousands of years ago, long before the Marxists came, before the British took Malabar, before the Dutch ascendancy, before Vasco da Gama arrived, before the Zamorins' conquest of Calicut. It could be argued that it began long before Christianity arrived in a boat and seeped into Kerala like tea from a tea bag. That it really began in the days when the love laws were made. The laws that laid down who should be loved and how much," unquote. The narrative further describes the condition of the untouchables during the late 19th and early 20th century in Kerala, where the paravans, like the untouchables, were not allowed to walk on public roads, not allowed to cover their upper bodies, not allowed to carry umbrellas. They had to put their hands over their mouths when they spoke to divert polluted breath away from those whom they addressed. This kind of violation of human rights in colonial times shocks the reader and brings to mind the situation prevalent in medieval Europe and in America when slavery existed. Convinced by British missionaries, the untouchables of Malabar, which is the Kerala region, Malabar region, converted to Christianity and joined the Anglican Church to escape the scourge of untouchability. They believed that Christianity was a casteless and classless religion. Unfortunately, they only, I quote, had jumped from the frying pan into the fire. They were made to have separate churches with separate services and separate priests, unquote. They even had a pariah bishop. Roy, while exposing the hypocrisy of the casteless religion, also exposes the government. She makes clear through fictional depictions that after independence, the situation became even more pathetic for the poor fellows in India. It would be relevant here to quote a few lines from Arundhati Roy's essay, Trickle-Down Revolution, from her book, Broken Republic that she published in 2011. She cites a portion of the speech delivered by one secular Indian Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, on the occasion of the 63rd anniversary of India's independence. According to Roy, the speech is, I quote, bone-chilling banal. As Prime Minister Manmohan Singh says, I quote, the hard work of our workers, our artisans, our farmers has brought our country to where it stands today. We are building a new India in which every citizen should have a stake. An India which would be prosperous and in which all citizens would be able to live a life of honor and dignity in an environment of peace and goodwill. An India in which the basic rights of every citizen would be protected, unquote. What could be more ironic? Well, after being the victims of caste Christianity, the Paravans of IMNM are subjected to a governmental system of mindless neglect, which belies the optimistic temper of the then Prime Minister's speech. They were deprived of government benefits like job reservations or bank loans at lowest interest rates because officially on paper they were Christians and therefore casteless. The government of India has reservations for lower caste people, but if these people have converted to either Islam or to Christianity, then they lose that quota or that reservation status, reserved status. So these people were subjected to these kinds of governmental hypocrisy and neglect. The outward trappings of democracy is actually a facade for the ugly face of feudalism. And the narrator comments that, I quote, it was like having to sweep away your footprints without a broom. They used to sweep away their footprints with a broom in the ancient times. Now, it was like having to sweep away your footprints without a broom, or worse, not being allowed to leave footprints at all. Unquote. In The God of Small Things, the poor and the untouchable join the Marxist Party of India, which is a popular political party in Kerala, in the state of Kerala. They bestow their faith on the reformist, classless, and socialist motto of the Communist Party, little knowing that, I quote, Marxism was a simple substitute for Christianity. Replace God with Marx, Saturn with the bourgeois, heaven with a classless society, the church with the party, and form and purpose of the journey remain similar, unquote. The novel critiques the basic fabric of communism in Kerala, as the narrative explains cynically that, I quote, the real secret was that communism crept into Kerala insidiously. As a reformist movement that never overtly questioned the traditional values of a caste-ridden, extremely traditional community. The Marxists worked from within the communal divides, never challenging them, never appearing not to. They offered a cocktail revolution, a heady mix of Eastern Marxism and Orthodox Hinduism, spiked with a shot of democracy, unquote. Roy creates Veluta, a Paravan youth, as an aspiring youth, the representative of the victims of the exegesis of socio-political discrimination. Veluta represents the Paravans who are denied equal rights in society and often fall prey to the treachery of social systems. Hence, he becomes a card-holding member of the Communist Party. He believes that he is an important member of the classless party and should thereby enjoy the solidarity, the protection of its members. But the perfidious system and comrade K.N.M. Pillai, who represents the Communist Party that fights for workers' rights everywhere in the world, betray him when he needs them the most. That is, on the eve of his arrest and his subsequent torturous and inhuman killing by the police. He's turned away by Comrade Pillai, who tells him, I quote, "Comrade, you should know that party was not constituted to support workers. Not to support workers' indiscipline in their private life," unquote. What to Veluta was a question of dignity, of life and death. To Comrade Pillai, it was mere indiscipline in his private life. In Comrade Pillai's opinion, Veluta is a Paravan first and foremost, and therefore deserves to be treated as Paravans have always been treated. Therefore, when Inspector Thomas Matthews, who was himself a congressman, sends for Comrade Pillai to the police station to ensure, I quote, whether the Paravan had any political support or whether he was operating alone, unquote. Pillai assures Inspector Thomas Matthews that Veluta did not enjoy, I quote, the patronage or protection of the Communist Party, that he was on his own, unquote. Roy goes into horrific graphic details as she describes the savagery of the policemen who are hell-bent on eradicating a social evil. And that social evil is the untouchable daring to fall in love with a touchable lady. So that an untouchable had dared to transgress the love laws prescribed by a touchable society. He had dared to engage in a relationship with a touchable upper caste Christian. The narrative explains this exegesis, I quote, the pose of touchable policemen acted with economy, not frenzy, efficiency, not anarchy, responsibility, not hysteria. They didn't tear out his hair or burn him alive. They didn't hack off his genitals and stuff them in his mouth. They didn't rape him or behead him. After all, they were not battling an epidemic. They were merely inoculating a society, a community against an outbreak, unquote. The narrative here is a pointer to the conflict of power where the dominant class wipes out anything and anybody, even footprints, which it suspects of deterritorializing its dominance. In her attempt to sensitize the readers to the plight of the subalterns, Roy says that stories reveal themselves to us. The public narrative, the private narrative, they colonize us. They insist on being told about the relationship between power and powerlessness and the endless circular conflict they are engaged in. Though it may appear otherwise, Roy's writing is not, she says, my writing is not about nations and histories. It is about power, about ruthlessness of power. This she writes in her book, nonfiction book, An Ordinary Person's Guide to Empire. Well, in the context, it is important to define subaltern, as Antonio Gramsci defines the term subaltern classes in the Modern Prince and the Prison Notebooks, as those excluded from any meaningful role in a regime of power that subjugates them. Through consent, these subalterns participate in the hegemony created and controlled by the dominant group. The subalterns have no independent space from which to articulate their voice because hegemony conditions them to believe in the dominant values. Precisely so in the narrative of the God of Small Things. Veliappapan is described as an old world paravan who has seen the crawling backward days. He had once had an accident in which he had damaged an eye, and Mamachi, the matriarch of the house of Aymanan, of the touchable Christian family, the Aipe family there, had paid for his glass eye. He has a glass eye, and Mamachi had paid for that. He was mentally conditioned to and accepted the fact that this Christian munificence could not and should not be paid off. His entire life centers on the patronage of the Aipe family. He clings to the traditional perception of an untouchable's dharma, that is, a sense of submission combined with a sense of duty. The internalization of the dominant paradigm of submission makes him fear for his younger son, Veluta. Veluta is self-assured. So his self-assured, independent ways frightened his father. While these qualities were perfectly acceptable, perhaps even desirable in touchables, Veliappapan thought that in a paravan they could and would and indeed should be construed as insolence. Conditioned thus by hegemony and dominant power subjugation, maimed by fear of dharma, he sacrifices fatherly love and duty to a sense of subjugation to the Aipe family. Roy tells us with wry humor that, I quote, terror took hold of him. You can't order fear around, not even a paravan's. Veliappapan told Mamachi what he had seen. He asked God's forgiveness for having spawned a monster. He offered to kill his son with his own bare hands to destroy what he had created, unquote. He has no independent mental or moral space from which to articulate his own voice. He betrays his own people and reports the nightly meetings and love affair between his untouchable son Veluta and the Aipe's touchable daughter Amu, thereby invoking the ire of the touchable world of Aymanan. As a result, the conflict between the binaries of power and the powerless, the touchable and the untouchable, lie exposed. Unquestioned subjugation of the Dalits to the hegemonic dictates could be traced down to the caste-based economic discourse. This discourse is important considering the upper caste hierarchical system upper class hierarchical system has an economic basis. According to B.R. Ambedkar, I quote, untouchability is more than a religious system. It is also an economic system worse than slavery. An economic system that permits exploitation without obligation. Untouchability is not only a system of unmitigated economic exploitation, but it is also a system of uncontrolled exploitation. Unquote. The story of Veluta, which is a metaphor for the Dalit youth aspiring for emancipation and socio-economic equality, is a case in point. It reeks of unmitigated economic exploitation. Veluta, a clever boy under the patronage of Mamachi, is sent to the untouchable school. This school was set up by Mamachi's father-in-law, Punyan Kunju. When he was 14, Veluta met Johann Klein, a carpenter from Bavaria, So this gentleman had come to Kottayam, and Veluta was trained by him in carpentry. By the time he was 16, he had finished high school and was an accomplished carpenter. He also had a way with machines. He was a great help to Mamachi in her factory, and her son Chaco also appreciated this. He mended radios, clocks, water pumps. He looked after the plumbing and all the electrical gadgets in the house. Veluta oiled the water pump and the small diesel generator. Veluta built the aluminium sheet-lined, easy-to-clean cutting surfaces and the ground-level furnaces for boiling fruit, unquote. Velia Papin was old, and Kuttapan, Veluta's older brother, had fallen off a coconut tree and damaged his spine and was thus paralyzed. So it was up to Veluta to look after the family's economic needs. Well aware of his mechanical skills, Mamachi hired Veluta as the factory carpenter and also put him in charge of the general maintenance of the factory. Ambedkar's theory that untouchability inside the hierarchical system permits exploitation without obligation is evident in the narrative of the God of Small Things. Veluta is highly skilled, his labor is exploited, yet he is made to feel obliged that he is employed in the face of his untouchable status. I quote, "Paravans were not meant to be carpenters," unquote. By learning the skills of carpentry, Veluta has usurped the vocation of a higher caste, for which he faces the resentment of the other touchable factory workers. Mamachi takes advantage of the Paravan's ignorance and acquiescence and pays him less wage than he deserves. She keeps her conscience clear, paying Veluta less than she would a touchable carpenter and more than she would a Paravan. Veluta, a subaltern, participates in the socio-economic game laid out by the hegemony. He willingly accepts the humiliation of being paid lower wages for his skilled labor and being treated as an untouchable in spite of his education. Mamachi didn't encourage him to enter the house, except when she needed something mended or installed. She thought that he ought to be grateful that he was allowed on the factory premises at all, and allowed to touch things that touchables touched. She said that it was a big step for a Paravan. Getting a job, that too at a low wage, and being able to touch things that touchables touched is indeed a big laugh in the face of secular socialist India in the late 20th century, the time of the narrative. The economic exploitation of the Paravans glares at the propaganda of economic progress of the people of India. It is paradoxical when Comrade K.N.M. Pillai, the chief of the Communist Party in the narrative, warns Chaco, the factory owner, I quote, "That Paravan is going to cause trouble for you. Take it from me, get him a job somewhere else, send him off. See, comrade, any benefits that you give him, naturally others are resenting it. They see it as a partiality. After all, whatever job he does, carpenter or electrician or whatever it is, for them, he's just a Paravan. It is a conditioning they have from birth. This I myself told them is wrong, but frankly speaking, comrade, change is one thing, acceptance is another," unquote. Here, Annie Besant's view, published in the Indian Review in 1909, is reiterated. We are offered a glimpse of the ugly face of politics where the dominant caste protects its own interests. Arundhati Roy has faithfully documented the social history of the untouchables. The God of Small Things constitutes a powerful critique of the moral corruption and hypocrisy of Indian society, which allows untouchability to continue. In this novel, Roy tells a story of forbidden cross-caste love and to what extent a community will go to protect its old ways. Roy, a great champion of the cause of the Dalit and the deserted, points out those unnoticed shades of a social problem which generally escape the eyes of the reader. Veluta, the representative Dalit, has to fight for his existence in the society. Neither Veluta nor countless other Dalit like him can coexist peacefully with the touchable communities for as long as there is the stigma of untouchability attached to them. The God of Small Things encapsulates the pain, humiliation, and poverty of the Paravan community, which has lived at the bottom of India's social pyramid for millennia. The Dalit discourse develops through the interactions and conflicts between several spaces that define the contours of modern Indian society. Roy's fiction projects the newly developing discourse, which gives the Dalit agency. She locates and redefines the Dalit space that goes into conflict with patriarchal social constructs, thus subverting the patriarchal stereotypes and establishing itself as an independent and freely existing dynamic space that changes its shape and definition and reconstructs its own meaning to counter the domination of the hegemonic discourse. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. I know I took less than an hour. I think a little less than.
Oh, thank you so much, Shruti. I love your presentation. And I have to say that I myself am a longtime fan of Roy's work, as is Ana Beatriz. I've read both of her books in English, but both of the ones that you've mentioned have been translated into Portuguese and published in Brazil, I think by Companhia das Letras, which is one of the most prestigious publishers of international literature, renowned authors. And so her work is somewhat known. One thing that I would like to say now, Anna will be joining us as well. We can have a little exchange here and then open up also for other participants to ask questions via the chat. I would like to say, how happy I am that you chose this theme, because in fact, our meeting today is sponsored by Women in Cultural Production, as well as the sociology, our graduate program in sociology. And of course, as an outside observer, somebody who has always been interested in Indian society and culture, but faces this as a huge challenge. Your discussion of caste, this economic and symbolic system, which is so unfathomable to people living in other modern societies, speaks to things that I continue to be very perplexed by. And little by little, with these different elements, we start to understand a little bit more. And I know that for graduate students and other people in sociology, this is very precious to have an opportunity to hear your take on it, and through the words of this important woman writer, Arundhati Roy. So, it's very interesting also because you're working with her literary representation, but her intentions are to produce a work of literature that has this kind of dense description, as anthropologists would say, and therefore sociological value. So, this is interesting also for me as somebody who has maybe a foot and a half in sociology and half of a foot in literature, just in terms of the work that I do at the university, or maybe half and half, let's say, and discussions that we often have, or that we sometimes have in our very challenging struggle to create interdisciplinary bridges at our university. It is a major challenge. And so I find that your talk today has given us a lot of elements to think very specifically about this issue of the issue of caste as a social system that is very hard for us to understand. And yet, as you so cogently bring in this concept of Gramsci's of the subaltern, well, we do have, you remind us that we have conceptual tools also to use to understand it, that we also use in talking about Brazil or in talking about other parts of the world, right? So that helps us to build these bridges to understanding a society that is in so many ways distant from the one that we live in. And at the same time to think about how sociology and literature come together and to encourage us to cross disciplinary boundaries more and more. That is something that we, at our university, we continue to have a hard time doing, and I believe that we're not doing it enough. So I thank you again. And I would also like to ask you a question, which is, well, you spoke about how for Roy in this work and also the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, above and beyond all else, she is trying to evoke the terrible, crushing, persistent reality of power in society. And we also think of Roy as somebody who writes from the perspective of a woman. I believe we could say a feminist. I believe we could say an eco-feminist. So I guess my question has to do with that. And to what extent, well, given ample reason for disenchantment, disillusionment with this Marxist supposed solution, which ends up colluding with power, would you say that Roy somehow would see women's involvement? I mean, I know you described in the novel the role of a woman who is very much
repeat your question? I lost you because your voice broke. So could you repeat your question? What is the question exactly?
So, yeah, I know it's kind of roundabout, but my question has to do with how Roy sees women and the potential of especially kind of an ecofeminism to overturn some of these very stubborn and persistent economic and especially symbolic structures of power in Indian society, because at least I associate her so much with ecofeminism. And so, yeah, that's my question. That's my question without overextending myself here.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very interesting question because India is working towards women empowerment, right? But Arundhati Roy, because India is a vast country with a lot of different strata of society. So there are the elites, there are the upper middle class, there are the lower middle class, there are the untouchables, there are lots of people, the tribal people. So, when it comes to the woman question, right, they are given a fair chance. Women are given a fair chance at the grassroots, and the land rights of women have been rectified. The rights of women in their father's house have been given, right? So India is working towards that politically, right? But when you come to the actual thing, there is too much of patriarchy in the fabric of society. See, rules, politics are on one side and reality is on the other, right? Indian society is a very, very paradoxical and complex society. Here we have rights where save the woman, save the girl child, save nature, and there you have forests burning and people are hardly concerned. They are concerned, but local people are not very concerned about ecological aspects, just like what happened in the Amazon fire. You see, theoretically you are concerned and the government is very, very concerned, and there are lots of things on the news, in the newspapers, and academic people are interested in that. But what about the local people? And then now come to another, you come to woman emancipation and the freedom to love, right? That is taboo in Indian society even today. So if somebody wants to love somebody from another caste or chooses to marry somebody without the permission of the parents, without the parents knowing, arranged marriages are still prevalent and very much so in India. So that is another issue which Arundhati Roy raises in both the Utmost Happiness and also in God of Small Things, right? And in Haryana, we see there is a state called Haryana up north of India. There we see the Khap Panchayat. If a girl dares to fall in love, if a boy dares to fall in love with a girl, doesn't matter the caste, then they will be lynched in public. There is a people's parliament there, and they will be lynched in public. The government cannot do anything about it. Because who is the government after all? The constitution, the law, the court is not the government. The people are the government. So you see, they might go to jail or something might happen and then their advocates will fight for them and fine. But at the root of all is this kind of acceptance of what was happening centuries ago. That kind of thing that ideology is entrenched into the psyche of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, like there is a Sanskrit saying that women, like creepers, cannot grow without support. Creepers cannot grow without support. So women cannot go without support. This is a Sanskrit adage. And that is what society believes. And you cannot help it. Does that answer your question? Am I close? Have I been close to answering your question?
Sure. I mean, we can go on and talk about this for days, but we will have more opportunities, I am sure. This is just the beginning. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you very much for the approach you gave on this complexity of Indian society. Sometimes here in Brazil or in this Western side of the world, people cannot imagine how complexity is agencied there in India. It's very hard to fix some categories, some social categories there. So this intersectional approach is very important for us, even in Indian literature. So thank you very much. And you brought something very special for me, in my point of view, that is understanding this oppression that the Haravans, the Dalits, and all these outcasts in India suffer is the same thing. People are oppressed in any part of the world experience. So it's not different from any part of the world. So this India situation is the same as we live in Brazil, as we live in countries of Africa and many parts of Europe and United States in different times. It's about oppression. It's about prejudice. It's about exclusion. So it's very rich that you brought this perspective on this Dalit situation. And so thank you very much, because sometimes I try to portray this and people understand India as something very weird and a place where people are kind of savage. The same thing people sometimes think about Brazil. We are kind of savages, we are not developed, and this is not the point. The point is that oppression happens in all parts of the world. So this is amazing how you brought this and how you put this in your presentation. Thank you very much. And of course, I have some questions about literature. Yes. And
well, I would like to say something here. Well,
yes.
if people have been reading, yeah, they have been reading the books of Arundhati Roy and other writers, including Adiga. So in Utmost Happiness, and also in this particular book, you see the Godhra carnage has been explained, how people were killed, massacred, and what happened in the right situation in Ahmedabad in Gujarat, that is there in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness. Well, there is nothing savage about that. Well, forgive me for saying that there is nothing savage about that, but that is nothing very, very particular to an Indian situation, or you cannot characterize that as an Indian situation, because you see in European countries, in most civilized, quote unquote, civilized countries like America, you see, you just saw how people are being lynched and how people are being killed in schools. There is racism. Little children have guns and they kill. What is happening throughout the world in Russia? You see how people are being bombed in various places. So it is not savage. It is one particular incident. If it is isolated and focused on, definitely people will blow that out of proportion. So India may appear weird to people because they have not. It's a country of different climates. The climate zone and the topography is very different. So there are different kinds of people. It's many countries pulled into one. All right. The food habits, the culture of the people in the Northeast, that is in Assam, and well, I've never been to the Northeast because it's so far away, and their culture, their food habits, everything is very different there than the south of India. Well, even I find the south of India very difficult to understand. Right, Miriam was there. So their food habit is not at all like our food habit, because we and the Bengalis, we live in the southeast of India. Our food habit is very different from the central people and then from the Western Indian people. So you see, it is a diverse country. There is unity in diversity. There is a lot of cultural differences. What Arundhati Roy is talking about is about Kerala. And the thing that she's talking about in
Seems that we've got a technological issue here, right?
Yeah.
For the moment, Shruti is frozen there, and we have a question. Okay, if this is, I guess we'll have to just wait a minute or two.
Till she come back.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, while she is coming back, I will show the cover of the books we are talking about. So some people maybe don't know. This is The God of Small Things, the book that Shruti focused in her presentation. This is the second one, written 20 years after the first, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. both translated in Portuguese, as Miriam have already said, but also Arundhati Roy has a very great production on nonfiction, a critical production like this one, Broken Republic. And this last one, that is, I haven't got it in paper, that is The Doctor and the Saint. So, and many other. Oh, you got it. Yeah, I have
Look
it.
what I have. My sister Deborah brought this to me.
I would love to read that.
We were showing the covers here.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I'm glad that you got back to us. We have a question here too. Another question that was flashed across the screen.
Yeah, I would like to answer a question. Yes.
Yes, I want to make a question.
Okay. And here's Shruti, can you see the question on the screen there from?
Yes. If the source of cruelty is the class segregation system in the God of Small Things, to what extent does Velutha suffer in spite of his skills? Is he a pawn in the socio-economic game? Of course he is. And he does. It's not only class segregation, it is caste segregation. It is an apartheid, right? Though we don't go with the skin color, but it is a kind of apartheid. If you take that as a metaphor, then you would know that it is something that segregates Velutha from the other people in the society, from the upper caste. Caste is more terrible than class. Class, at least they are touchable. There is a chance for emancipation, but in a caste struggle, in the power struggle between upper caste and lower caste, there is hardly any room for emancipation. It is absolutely nipped at the bud. They are they're not allowed a place, because even if the government gives them a quota, government gives them reservation, right? So women have reservation, government reservation, nobody questions that, right? Women are allowed to go up. There are many engineers, there are many doctors, there are teachers, you name them, the corporates, there's so many people. The women are now rising. So nobody questions that. People are happy about it. But if that happens with an untouchable, society resents it, definitely. So the upper caste people think that our chances are being given away to the Dalit. Our youngsters are jobless because of the Dalit. They do not think that for centuries made them jobless. They have kept them at the fringes of society. I was so shocked when I read a Marathi writer, Sharan Kumar Limbale. I read his writing, The Outcast. I was so shocked. I really couldn't sleep for a couple of nights because it haunted me. Poverty and exploitation can go to that limit. I mean, it's exactly like the American slave owners when they created the mammies, and having those people, they would sexually exploit the women and the men and yet not keep them in the house. When you have sex with them, intercourse with them, they are not untouchables. You touch them, you give them children, you don't name the child. The child becomes untouchable in spite of the fact that it has your DNA, your genes. So this is the paradox of society. It is more like the times of slavery in the Americas.
And in Brazil. Exactly. And I want to ask you something. How is the reception upon Dalit literature in India, or in the region in India, the reception of this Dalit literature? Well, people really read it?
Yes. Yes. Dalit literature was also in the fringes some time ago, like, maybe a decade ago. But their discourse is gaining agency. People are reading their literature, and there are Dalit departments, Dalit literature departments. We have kept them in our syllabus, in our courses. So Dalit literature is now gaining agency because we have the government. I told you, the government is giving them a lot of scope. Society is another thing, government is another thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You see,
So
you
it's
cannot
very deep,
you cannot enforce ideology. You cannot enforce something, goodness on people, right? You can tell them, you can coax them, you can take a whip to them for some time, but they become more antagonistic.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that there are numerous interactions at cultural levels, at institutional levels in society that enable the cultural attitudes to persist, right? I mean, from what I've seen from Indian film, let's say, in addition to the literature,
I beg your pardon?
there's a complex interaction in daily life in which people who belong to privileged classes also reproduce and reinforce a system that benefits them, in spite of official discourses. And even I'm sort of thinking about parallels to Brazilian society. Well, right now, we don't even have good official discourses. So it's another situation, very tragic and horrible. But, there are all of these different layers that come together. So even when you have, let's say, a government that is more progressive and promoting new legislation and social programs and benefits and so forth, there are lots of ambiguities, right? That that make their way through these different layers. I mean, I'm just imagining, I'm just speaking, sort of trying to think about it sociologically. But of course, my access to India is to Indian realities through literature, such as Arundhati Roy's, right, and film, whatever I've seen. So it's like, it's easy. No, well, yeah, I mean, it's very complex, but there's even in government action and social policy, it seems to me that from what I know as a sociologist and even from what I observe in Brazil, it's always like a step forward, a step backward. We'll do this, but there are other people who are among the privileged who don't want that to change. And so, these dynamics actually be dismantled with more force. Well, I have no solutions to that, but I think it's in the end, at these different levels, things come together to in favor of persistence rather than dismantling. Could it be like that? Because we saw, for example, in Brazil, let's say prior to the situation that we're in now, in the early 2000s, efforts were made very seriously, let's say, to promote, to give greater space to subaltern groups, right? And efforts included cultural politics and institutional politics. The economic system is always really complicated because there are power structures there that are global and local and ultimately can sabotage everything. So, this is why it is so hard to understand because of that complexity.
Yeah, the situation in India
to change it.
Yeah, the situation in India is a little difficult to understand because, when you see it from outside, from a different kind of lens, not being an insider, right? And when you read it from the perspectives of certain novelists, see, they could be some people who have, they want absolute change in one time. Had this been a country of one language, one culture, then possibly change would have been rapid. The government has taken a lot of steps socioeconomically for the uplift of the Dalit, the tribals. Well, they're taking away the tribal lands, and Dalit didn't have lands. So now the government policy is that nobody can take away the Dalit land. Nobody can take away the tribal person's land or the indigenous person's land. So, and also there is social distribution. They get lots of food. But the bane, the thing that which is a worm in the society is the mindset of the people, right? These are still in a colonial hangover. They still think that the government is not their own, in spite of the fact that the government is an elected government, they pay a lot of taxes to the government. Still, I'm not talking about the elite, right? I'm talking about people, the people who matter, the people in the villages, in the rural pockets, in the suburban India. See, they still are thinking, they're still in this kind of colonial hangover. They want, and when the government is, flooding them with benefits, social benefits, and things like that, they expect more without working. That is very difficult to understand. People don't want to work.
And I have a question also about Kerala, which is the only part of India that I was in, and only for 5 days, which were absolutely wonderful. And that was where we met at the international conference.
There is a question about what? I think Anna can relay me your question because your voice is breaking and Anna's isn't.
About Kerala, the state of Kerala.
Oh, the state of Kerala.
Actually.
Yeah,
because
the state of Kerala is like more or less like the Indian state, but there, there was a predominance of Christians, and in certain parts, in the place of this, the locale of this novel. In fact, I went to this IMNM house that Arundhati Roy says, her ancestral home, when I was on an academic assignment to Kottayam. Kottayam is a city in Kerala. So when I was there, I went to see this place. It is now abandoned, and there are grass and trees everywhere, but it's a very beautiful house. I saw it, I got a glimpse of it, and I saw the Minachal River, a tiny river, and but it's like I saw all those things. I wanted to see that little island, which is absolutely fictitious. She is thinking about the Heart of Darkness, and she's thinking about Toni Morrison's Tar Baby. When she has constructed this island, she has constructed Veluta's journey to the island, where she has thought of Toni Morrison's Tar Baby, where sun swims across and goes to that little island where she finds Jadine and Undine. So I saw a lot of intertextuality in that book. So some of it is true, and some of it, even when you say that it is an autobiographical fiction, it is to an extent, because Mary Roy, Arundhati Roy's mother, the Amu in the novel, she actually revolutionized the rights of women in parental property. She was the one who actually broke the love laws, because as a girl, she was not given agency in her own home. So she fell in love with a Bengali person and went right up from Kerala to Assam or North Bengal to the tea gardens, right? Arundhati Roy's father was there. He was a Hindu who later converted to Christianity, and her brother is a fine man. He's not like Esther in the novel, right? So that is what she's thinking of. Twins. Well, she doesn't have a twin, but she is a script writer, and she's exposed to a lot of reading, and therefore her imagination has played, and she has tapped these resources to build a story. Most of it is a kind of story. Incest is something which is a taboo, and incest is not allowed, and she stops her novel there. Well, you really don't know whether it is incest or whether they're just holding each other or what, right? Is it like some kind of a filial love, or is it some kind of a maternal love, or is it incest? Who knows? We cannot pinpoint that this has happened. And that is it. See, her novel becomes very, very postmodern in this aspect. This is how it is very postmodern. So it is a complex narrative. It is post-colonial. It is postmodern. And it is something about culture. So you could also analyze it in a new historist framework.
And a question, can you hear me? So when I met you, when I went to that international conference on ecology and culture, I was very impressed by the young people.
Could you copy it into the chat box, please? If it's not in Portuguese, into the private chat. Can you copy the question into the private chat?
Oh my goodness. I have a truck outside the house now. This is terrible. I would like to ask, I'll write the question too. I would like to ask about young people today in India, if you have hopes that the younger generation could be a harbinger of change.
Yes,
because I was very impressed by the young people that I saw in Kerala, the young women and the young men. I saw remember the amazing dance performance, which to this day, I took some photos of it and I was asking myself, to me, it seemed like there was so much gender transgression that was being suggested. And it was a group of young men and young women, university students. So I felt it was a moment of happiness to me. And I was in awe and I was astonished because to me it was, I would have felt that way if I had seen that sort of performance here at our university.
If you go to universities, if you go to Buckingham Palace, you're definitely going to be served the best of food. You're going to see royalty. You're not going to see the poverty of people. Right? You're not going to see the real thing. It's a tinsel kingdom that you went to. You went to Amrita University, and there everything was vegetarian, but Keralites are beef eaters. Right? Most of them have beef, and some of them, those who abstain, they have pure vegetarian food, whatever they call pure. It's not vegan, it's vegetarian. Right? No meat, no eggs, no poultry, things like that, and no fish. So that is different. And when you talk about hope, definitely there is hope, because the government sees to it that with the reservation, and there are so many schools now in those rural pockets, in those places, so gradually things are changing. But there are still certain places, especially in Maharashtra and in Tamil Nadu. They are the states where there is some kind of, these kinds of ideas are still prevalent in those places, because Odisha has been, or maybe some places in Bengal as well, but because Odisha has been a Buddhist state for quite some time. When you think of the history of Odisha, right, when it was conquered in the Great Kalinga War, I have never seen Dalit being tortured. I have grown up with Dalit children. We do not have separate places for them, and Odisha is a different place. In south of Odisha, because of the influence of southern India, the Dalit are segregated more. But as you go to the central and, my side of Odisha, the coastal Odisha belt, you do not find so much of segregation. I don't see the unhappiness. I'm a landowning person. I am a Brahmin myself. I'm the upper caste Brahmin. I am a landowner, and there are Dalit working in my lands, but they're happy. They're happy in the sense they get equal opportunity. Like any poor person, a poor Brahmin would get the same opportunity as a poor Dalit. So there is no lynching, and there is no such thing that you won't drink from the same glass that I drink or same shop that I go to. There is nothing like that in Odisha. I don't think there is much of this in Bengal. That is why you don't find much of Dalit literature in Odisha. You find tribal literature where land has been taken away from indigenous people, and there is this indigenous crisis, but there is no Dalit crisis in Odisha. So India is indeed a complex place. Indeed, I was surprised. I told you I was shocked when I read things from Maharashtra. I never knew from in my own little cocoon, in my comfort zone, I had not seen such things happen. And in my state, a woman would not be lynched, right? Because she fell in love with somebody or got married to somebody from another caste. She wouldn't be lynched. Maybe the father and the mother would be displeased for a while, but things would fall in place. But in North India, when you go to Haryana, this is very bad, and in Uttar Pradesh. So why talk about only Dalit and social segregation? If you are from the Department of Sociology, you would also know the religious discriminations and the plight of the people from I'm being politically correct.
Oh, well, we definitely have to spend more time in India, and you have to come here and see Brazil. Hopefully, the time.
And there is censorship throughout the world now. Censorship is there throughout the world now. So, I mean, we are living in very, very peculiar times.
Sure.
Most certainly. Anna, do you have any other literary questions to ask? I mean,
yes, I would ask. I think a last question for you, Shruti. I don't know if at least it's the last that comes to my mind. Thinking about opportunity for women and how women are represented in Roy's fiction, especially the character called Amu. Here in The God of Small Things.
I beg your pardon? Are women be
represented by Arundhati Roy, thinking about how Amu, what happened to Amu in God of Small Things. Do you think it's a kind of do you think that Amu, came to be a caravan herself after what happened in the novel?
Amu is not the every woman. Amu is not the every woman. Amu is a fictional character, and in any country across the world, if a woman who is very poor, doesn't have means to survive, would live in a place and she would be sick, and there is if there were no kind of you have I think you have social support from the government. In India, we do not have the social security system. So if you do not have a social security system and you're out in the world alone, then, well, she did not stay in the house. Nobody kicked her out. They shouted at her, they told her many things, but she could have, if you look at the other side of things, she could have sustained. She could have just stayed in her room, and after a few days, the storm would have gone over her head, and she could have still lived in that house. But she chose to go out. She chose to send her daughter. She chose all those things. And she lived in a place, she was not well. She was sick. She was suffering from asthma. And she stayed in that little room where she died. right? Probably she didn't go to a hospital. And this is very funny because hospitals are free in India. She could have gone to any general hospital, right? If she went to a rich nursing home, she would have to pay a lot, but she could have gone to any hospital in India. That was her choice. So maybe Arundhati is telling us that choice is more important than just sustaining, just accepting things, just staying there. Because you see, she is projecting another kind of woman in utmost happiness. She's projecting a rebel and a woman who can hide her love, who can marry, who can be conniving, who can marry another man to camouflage her love, and she can go and have a relationship. She can be a terrorist. She can be all kinds of things. The modern woman, the absolutely modern woman. So she is saying that everybody has a choice.
That is
So,
interesting.
and if you have a choice, if you take a choice, you have to pay for it.
And so just one more question in that regard. As Anna mentioned, I think this was when we were waiting for you to return to the screen.
Thank you so much, Anna and Miriam, for having me here.
Oh, there are always technological issues, right? But we managed quite well today.
Do we have any questions?
We always have technological issues of some sort. I mean, you can't get away without them at some moment. But so when Anna was showing the covers of both of Roy's novels,
I think she cannot hear you.
oh, I guess I could write it. So what I would like is if you could
comment. To write in the chat. Shruti, Miriam is going to write an answer, a question in the chat.
Time between one novel.
Yes. Well, there was a big time lapse between one novel and the next, right? That is the question. So, Arundhati Roy has been an activist, and she has been writing non-fiction. Her first novel, which was a part, I mean, she set up so many things together, it became very complex. And probably she couldn't shake off the burden of the memory of that novel to write a new novel. Also, she was so involved with social activities that her creative energy was taking a rest, because this book, the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, has been questioned so far as its narrative structure is concerned. She has put in too many big ideas into one text. In spite of the fact that it was long listed, it never reached the short list of bookers. Because she has too many ideas there, and the narrative somehow slips out of her hand at times. There is no logic in certain things, how and why this woman comes and stays with the transgender person in the graveyard. The way she has tried to compromise with certain things just explains that she needed more gap. So, this is how I would like to comment, and how everybody in India is looking at it, and the academia is looking at it, that the time lapses because she ran out of the story steam. Because she's very involved. She's been actively writing non-fiction. She has been very, very actively writing non-fiction. And so, it's very difficult for a non-fiction writer to come back into the world of imagination and to think up something, to fictionalize the character, and to write a story.
Interesting. complications of sociology and literature, right? Do you
Always.
think that she'll write another novel?
Yes.
Miriam asked
Sorry?
if you think she's going to write another novel.
Well, I'm mixed feelings about that. I don't know.
And who would you recommend we read?
To Kill a Mockingbird was one-time novel and a single novel. The next novel, okay, I mean, it isn't a novel. I didn't really like it. So some people write the novel, and the novel exists.
And it's fine. It's amazing. They've given a gift to humanity with one fabulous novel. There is a Mexican writer, Pedro Páramo, of the 20th century, who wrote, that's the name of the novel, Pedro Páramo. The writer was Juan Rulfo. And Pedro Páramo is a very thin book.
If you have a question, put it in the chat, in the private chat, please, because I cannot hear you. Your voice is breaking, Miriam.
Oh, well, that's okay. It's just a digression.
I think she's right in there. It was a digression.
Okay. Welcome.
About a Mexican writer who wrote one small novel which got a lot of, brought him to fame, but he didn't want to write anymore. Or a Brazilian writer who wrote Lavoura Arcaica, a fabulous novel. What is his name, Anna? He wrote Lavoura Arcaica. He is of, I believe, Lebanese origin, and it's kind of an
Hadouan Nassar.
This is like a very earth-shattering work that he wrote. I'm certain it's been translated into English. Well, I hope it has been. And people keep on bothering him, and he's a fairly old man now. And this was a long time ago that he wrote the novel. And I saw him being interviewed. I saw him on an internet channel, and he was almost forced to be defensive about his right to have written one earth-shattering novel and maybe a few other things, and that was it, and he gave up on. But I can really understand that, because sometimes a person writes something that is so monumental. I would imagine that the writer himself or herself would feel that anything else would be a letdown. And you're expected to live up to a huge reputation that you've built, unintentionally, because you write from passion, right? And then I can imagine it must be quite a hard thing to live with in some cases, right? In other cases, writers just keep on writing, and some of their works are exceptional and others are not, or all of them are. It's very interesting from the point of view of, just thinking about authors and literature. Oops. Anyway, I think that we have to continue our conversations. Since the pandemic has brought us only one good thing, and this is it. It has really encouraged us to seek out channels that already existed, right? Pre-existing channels, but we weren't that inclined to use them. And now we've been forced to do it. So now we can just deal with the time zones. If we can deal with the time zones and the technology which falters, our dialogues can intensify and grow, and hopefully they will become hybrid, right? Be able to move from the virtual to the physical. That is one of my big hopes now.
So Shruti will be able to be here in Brazil.
Yes.
Yes, I would love to. I have taken the first shot. So I will be vaccinated.
Really? This is nice. We are still waiting here.
Oh,
Congratulations.
So, my dear friends,
I really enjoyed interacting with you people. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Anna Beatrice. I really wanted to see you people live, and it's a good thing that technology has advanced so much, and pandemic has taught us so many things that at least we could meet, interact, talk, however broken it was, Dalit talk, but
Virginia, if Virginia is around still, I would like it if she would just come back on screen again so that I could thank her as profusely as she deserves to be thanked.
Yes, there is Virginia.
She made all of this possible as well. Virginia, who is a doctoral student in sociology at UFPR, who today is joining us from Toronto, Canada, where she has been for a year now. And we are hoping that other people in our university community will have a chance to listen, to watch even a subtitled version. That is our intention, that eventually we're able to provide a subtitled version of our conversation today. And may many more come. So again, my great thanks to Shruti, to my dear friend and colleague Ana Beatriz, who's always my partner, parceira, companion in these ventures. Again, to Virginia, and also to Tatiani, the other graduate student in sociology who has been backstage helping us to make this happen.
We must thank for our colleagues from India that were watching us. So
yes.
Very an honor for us that you are here. Hope you have enjoyed this time with us, and hope we have another opportunity to have you with us, Shruti, and our colleagues, so that we can really be partners in our research. It's very nice to have you here.
Yeah, we should.
Yes.
We should. I would like to know more about people in Brazil. I would like to know about, the general individuals and the indigenous people there. I'm very interested in the ecology of Brazil. I want to see the rainforest, how people live there. Like I'm really interested in that. And what are the stories that they have? The ancient stories and the modern stories, how the ancient has transcended time, and is it still retained in the modern?
Very
Wonderful.
Nice. Very nice. We may think something about this. Yes, who knows what future will bring, huh?
Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you. Thank you very much. A big virtual hug. And that's it for today, I guess.
Thank you all. I think we should leave now. It's like Virginia must be very tired. It's 2 hours now.